What's going on, everybody? Thanks for joining. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you guys how I edit real estate photography photos. I know there's other ways to do it, but this is just how I do it and figured it'd be worth sharing with you guys. And either if you're interested in learning how to edit, or if you're just interested in my process and how I do it, this is how I get it done. So we're gonna do an interior photo today from a awesome listing that I did a video on a few weeks ago. So go check that out if you haven't seen that already. But yeah, let's jump into it. And along the way, I will be trying to share with you some of the shortcuts that I use that allow me to speed up my process, because when you're doing about 25 to 40 of these, it does tend to take a while. So any shortcuts you can use definitely helps along the way. So first of all, before we even get into editing, I want to show you that I do take 5 exposures when I'm at the property. So I used to take 3, didn't feel like that was enough, so I do take 5 exposures now. It gives you a lot of leeway and room to edit the interior and through the windows. And some realtors really want to be able to see window shots, and especially when you have views of the mountains like this, that's when the views through the windows really helps. So yeah, so let's just get right into it. So typically I'll just press auto and it'll do just its basic auto correction from there. And then first thing I do is I press C. Okay, so I press C and I get to the cropping tool and I press auto just to do a little fine adjustment. And then I look at the sides here just to make sure that it's all straight up and down. So usually I'll go to the vertical on the geometry down at the end and just make very slight adjustments. That looks about good to me. And then I'll have to crop that in a little bit just because up at the top here you're seeing some white, which is not the image. All right, now as far as editing goes, as far as lighting goes, I always take highlights all the way down, and then I usually bring whites down to 0, and then I usually bump the exposure up quite a lot. So I want, in the histogram up here, I want the exposure to be pretty far right. So I know it does look blown out right now, but we'll do some adjustments. I usually bring shadows down to make the darks look darker. Sometimes there's a fine line between using the black or the shadows to make that good. And then I do usually add about between 15 and 25 clarity. I'll do a little bit of noise reduction, and then I do defringing just to make sure there's none of that going on. Now, we'll get back to the room in a little bit. I like to adjust the windows at this point. So what I do is I press B, and that usually brings up, so right here, and it shows you the shortcut for brush. So I use the brush tool and I'll do 0 feather and 100% flow. And what I do is mask all the windows out. And what I'm doing here is making an adjustment just to the windows so that they'll be very clear, as if you had walked into the room and your eyes are exposing for both at the same time. So I usually bring exposure down. I try to leave highlights up a bit, but exposure and shadows I bring down quite a bit. And then also, because of the white balance difference between the room and outside, it typically ends up being a little bit more blue than it should. So I bump the temperature up of the outside quite a bit. And yes, trees are typically green, but here in Colorado it's been fall, so all the leaves have been changing, so they are a little bit yellow orangey at this time. And I'll add a little bit of saturation in there too to get the sky going. So that's a good start. And then what I'll do now is erase all the edges, so you're only seeing the exposure for the windows, because obviously it's bleeding onto the rest of the image. And then I'll do some fine adjustments after that, just to see if I need to do any more adjustments then. But this is how I do all the windows. I'll do a little bit at first. So yeah, I'll use the eraser tool to erase one part right here, and then if you press shift and then go to your next spot, it'll actually create a line in that whole direction for you to delete in that plane from point A to point B. And that's what helps me speed up my process. It does take a while, but it's definitely better than having to drag the whole eraser tool across. But yeah, I will speed ramp through this so you guys don't have to watch me diligently go through this. All right, so I'll stop it right here. As you can see, part of where I did the masking, we got into the chandelier, and yes, I do erase all the parts of any object that's in the way. So one of my least favorite things is when there's plants in the window, because you have to erase around those. It's kind of a pain in the butt, but you got to do it if you want to make it look good. So, all right, so now that I've erased all the edges around the windows, you can see that it looks a lot better than it did before. And we'll do some minor tweaking. So in general, I think now that we see the outside more exposed correctly, I think we can actually bump the exposure up in the room a little bit, and then we'll go back to that window mask, lower that exposure, and so now the bedroom looks a little bit more well exposed. And then, all right, so now the next mask that I do is a color range. So if you do Shift and C, you can take a color sample, and I do it of the wall. So you want to get rid of some of that orange yellow tint that's going on in there. So I usually take that color range and desaturate it a little bit. Cool. So that's already looking a little bit better. Then we're pretty much almost there, I think. All right, so sometimes in hardwood floors, you do get a little bit of the light coming off the floor, so I'll take a very feathered, moderately feathered brush, lower flow, and I'll just do these two little spots on the floor. And I desaturate them so that's less blue, and then I pump a little bit of warmer tint in there, orange, just to make it look a little bit more like the hardwood floor. And then maybe a little bit of lowering the exposure. And then lastly, so it doesn't bleed onto the carpet, I will erase that along the carpet. All right. Cool, looking almost there. The last thing I'll do basically is, let's see, I'll do one linear gradient. So I just pressed L, and that gives you this linear gradient, and I'll bump up the exposure a little bit in the corners just so they're not so shadowy. Make them look about the same. And then I'll actually do the same to the ceiling, just so that's a little bit less exposed or less shadowy. And then the last thing I think I'll do is I just pressed R, and that gives you a radial gradient. And then just lower the exposure on the chandelier a little bit so it's not crazy overexposed. And yeah, I think that's about it. All right, so that's it. That's what I do for every photo, every interior photo that I go through for all my real estate photography. Exterior is a little bit different. I'll try to do a video on that and maybe twilight photos as well. But if there's a specific video that you guys want me to do, let me know. Drop a comment below. And if you have any other questions, let me know. But please subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.